Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing remarkably well, and I hope you're going to get that lovely, warm, comforting cup of cocoa, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight, and this is part 2 of our story. So if you haven't heard part 1, click on the description, because you don't want to miss out on it. And let's continue with part 2 of our story. I know this because my late brother Zach told me an incredible story about his personal encounter with a Bigfoot family, whom unequivocally saved his life. I got exceedingly upset when you brought up the controversial, emotive subject of Bigfoot, as the indelible story brings back so many fond memories of my late brother. We were incredibly close, you see. We shared so many secrets together. My brother was an intrepid adventurer, an explorer, a passionate cave diver. Growing up, my father always warned him that his adventurous spirit could bring about his fortuitous demise. "Son," my father would say, "I don't think it's very good that you are continuously dicing with death in the way that you are. If you settled down one day to raise a family of your own, it would be exceedingly selfish of you to pursue such daredevil pursuits. Would you want a child of yours to grow up without a father, just because you couldn't resist the urge of acquiring an adrenaline rush from throwing yourself off a cliff face with free-falling gear that finally fails you?" My brother wholeheartedly agreed with my father, but he told him that he'd rather have an exciting short life than a long, dull one. "You're right, father. If I get married, I will have to retire from the valiant sports I engage in. I know it wouldn't be fair to your grandchildren if they were to grow up without a father, or for my wife to be without a husband. I think for that reason I should not get married or settle down. The trouble is, Dad, I can't help myself. The desire to embrace these dangerous sports is all-consuming. The adrenaline rush is addictive. It's hard to explain. I just don't feel alive if I don't take death-defying risks that bring me a hair's breadth away from losing my life. There is no feeling quite like it." "Poppycock," my father had spouted. "Listen to yourself, Zach. You do talk such nonsense. Do you realize how insanely ridiculous you sound? Your life is worth so much more than toying with it so loosely, like playing Russian roulette with it. It's madness, that's what it is. Madness. I do not know where you inherited this desire to play with fire like this, but you know the rules about fire. Sooner or later, you'll get burnt. You didn't inherit this from me." He threw his arms over his head in exasperation. "For God's sake, Zach! If you want a rush, why don't you try something less hair-raising, like smoking pot or taking magic mushrooms? Why do you have to do this? Me and your mother live on a knife edge all the time, worrying about you. Is it fair what you're doing to us? Please, I beg you, Zach, as your father, do something that does not rudely engage such a high volume of risk. Something that won't turn my hair grey overnight, or give your mother a nervous breakdown. She doesn't deserve this, nor do I." "I'm sorry, Dad. I don't want you to worry about me. Really, I don't. Don't you think I've tried smoking pot and some of those other creative pursuits? But it's not the same. I've tried magic mushrooms, of course I have. They're not for me. The rush is like drinking flat champagne, in contrast to its effervescent equivalent. I'm sorry, but living on the edge of life, by experimenting with venturesome sports, is so much more riveting." My father had looked at my brother through pleading eyes that gained no comfort, for he knew his persuasive words were almost certainly falling on deaf ears that refused to listen to his sagacious advice. "What do you think it's going to do to your mother, Zach, when one day I tell her your parachute did not open, or a shark mistook you for a seal, and tore you apart limb from limb?" How do you think that will make her feel? Your mother's heart will break, and I will be the one left to pick up the pieces after her. Dad, do you think I want to be like this? I'd love nothing better than to have a 9-to-5 job like regular folk, and enjoy cycling over the weekend with my buddies, enjoying living a normal pedestrian life. For me, Dad, that's insipid, bland, colourless, insanely uninspiring. I'd love to be that way inclined, but I'm not. To live like that would make me feel as trapped as a caged bird. I need to fly, not to be tethered to a branch all day long. That's not for me, and it never will be. I didn't come out of the mould to live a safe life. I was born to face challenges and to ride the high tumultuous waves that cross my path. That is who I am, Dad. Of course, you're right. I know I won't live a long life. People like me, who test the boundaries, never ever do. It's written in our DNA. It's a given. One of these days, one of the risks I take will catch up with me. But when I'm gone, you will know this, that I embraced life to the fullest and exited this planet on my own terms, that I lived my life true to myself, without apologies, without recriminations or regret. If I die this way, I will welcome my death. Sheila paused for a moment, taking another sip of wine to steady her nerves. Of course, me and my mother also tried to persuade my brother to give up his passion for his high-risk sports. But it was like asking your domestic tabby to go vegan. It was never going to happen. I remember his girlfriend Candy was so desperate to get married to him. She proposed to him on top of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, getting down on her hands and knees and virtually begging him to say yes. She was also actually begging for him to give up his lifestyle. She was mortified and humiliated when he refused her, telling her that he couldn't marry her simply because he loved her. "Do you really want to be a young widow?" he said, "raising your own kids without a father? That is why I refuse to marry you." She turned around to him and said, "You bastard! You bastard!" her eyes filling with tears. I was there at the time. I could see how broken her heart was. But I knew my brother had done the right thing. He didn't have a choice in the matter. He really didn't. Needless to say, all these years later, Candy is now happily married with 3 children of her own. I think she now fully comprehends why my brother refused her marriage proposal. But she still loves him a great deal, and is very sad that he's gone. You see, my brother Zach did it all. Skydiving, swimming with sharks, anything that was marked with a big danger sign. Well, he'd do it. My brother soon developed a zealous passion for the sport of cave diving. He told me it was the most exciting sport in the entire world. He'd fly all over America, visit Sweden and places like that, where groups of cave divers would congregate and explore some of those underground cave systems. They would use some kind of rope underwater to help them not lose their way. But it was so easy to lose your life in that kind of tumultuous, precarious environment, especially when you ran out of oxygen, which could so easily happen. I promise you, despite your greatest precautionary measures, things can go so very badly wrong. It's a highly technical sport, of which the complexities I do not understand, nor do I actually want to. My brother knew people who died cave diving. On one occasion he had to help retrieve a body of a deceased friend, and nearly died in the process of doing so. I asked him why he enjoyed diving in these underground caves. He told me it was like entering another world. One day, Zach went scuba diving in these underground caves in the turquoise waters of Ontario. I'm not exactly sure what went wrong. He told me, of course, but all the technical jargon he was using to describe his scuba diving sounded like Russian to me. The long and the short of it is he and his friend got lost in this cave system underwater and completely ran out of oxygen. They came up for air in this underground cave, and that's when they found themselves face to face with a whole family of Bigfoots. You see, in this underground water system of caves, there was a cave above water, like a large open room. My brother said it was massive, and the Bigfoots had made it into a comfortable home. He had never seen anything like it in his life. The floors richly lined with carpets of animal pelts. It was very well organized, with stacks of firewood and a large fire pit, where a fire was crackling happily away, and a selection of freshly caught fish was being cooked on an open grill. There were old tree stumps that were being used as makeshift chairs and tables. The smell of the fish was absolutely amazing, and the smoke rose up through the holes in the upper rocks that acted like air vents. You could see prisms of daylight twinkling through the opening. My brother said it was quite beautiful. He could understand why the Bigfoots would live there. It was like having your own house overlooking the water, made out of sculptural rock. "You're kidding me," said Carol, looking nonplussed. "Your brother encountered a family of Bigfoot in this underground cave system. That's extraordinary. He must have had the shock of his life." "I'm not kidding," said Sheila. "It's exactly what happened. Zach was so shocked as he and his friend pulled themselves out of the water, climbing out in their wetsuits onto this rocky ledge, which was in effect trespassing on the Bigfoot's premises. But they either stayed in the water or died off in the cave. By this time they were dropping with exhaustion. They didn't have oxygen to even attempt diving back from where they'd come, so they were pretty much dead." My brother assured me that the tranquilizing presence of the Bigfoot family made him realize that there might be a more practical way out of these caves that didn't involve diving underwater. So seeing these Bigfoots was like an inspiriting lifeline. He perceived that maybe these idiosyncratic creatures could help them out of this vast rambling underground cave system. Until this point in time, my brother had been unbiased and unbigoted about the subject of Bigfoot. Let's just say my father had never been a cynic in regards to Bigfoot, as so many bizarre things had happened over the course of his short life that nothing really surprised him anymore. He had come so close to losing his life on multiple occasions, so he had a revolutionary way of seeing things. He emphatically believed we're spiritual beings having a physical experience here on Earth. I don't know who was more bewildered, more shocked about this outlandish, rather curious encounter, the Bigfoots or the two divers. I think the Bigfoots had almost certainly been caught unaware. My brother said for a long while 4 pairs of dumbfounded eyes locked onto them, as if they were saying, "Where the hell did you come from? How did you find us?" For a while it was almost like they were frozen in shock, not brought on by fear, of course, but by sheer astonishment, I suspect. "What did the Bigfoots look like?" asked Carol obsequiously. "Oh, so now you believe me. What happened to all your cynicism, Carol? And doubt, all that ridicule about your son's faith in Bigfoot? Don't be like that, Sheila. Isn't it enough that I believe you now? Your story is too incredulous to doubt. Please continue. I'm completely caught in its grips. You can't stop now, or I'll be banging on your Victorian house, demanding to know the rest of the story." I think the thing that startled my brother so much was just how human the Bigfoot were. He said they were very intimidating to look at, but you could sense their incredible intelligence. He said he got the profound sense that they could look right through you and know everything about you, about your life, and even your life path, almost as if they knew things about life that we as humans could not fathom. He felt the Bigfoots had a superior knowledge to ours, as if they were a lot closer to source and the realms of the angelic. That was the impression both men got about the Bigfoot family. There was something extremely outer-worldly about them. The colossal male Bigfoot towered at about 9.5 foot, and he was 4 foot wide across the shoulder area, so he was very, very big. The female was about 7 foot, and the young male Bigfoot was about 5 foot, lanky and rather gangly. His smaller sister was only 3 foot tall. They were all covered in long, flowing dark hair that my brother described as the colour of coal. They possessed distinctive pyramid-shaped heads and overlong arms. The female Bigfoots had feminine jawlines and finer features, whereas the big male looked like a noble Indian warrior with an impressive-looking flat nose, a square jawline, high cheekbones, and a furrowed forehead. They were as individualistic to look up close to as you and me, with distinctly unique features that set them apart from each other, so it was easy to tell them apart. They possessed grey leathery skins and deep-set dark eyes the colour of liquid treacle, but my brother said they all had kind eyes that he believed mirrored the benevolent nature of their hearts. My brother said he and his friend Keith just sat there, unloading their scuba gear on this rocky ledge at the edge of the cave. They were so fatigued that they rested for a long while to get their breaths back, while the Bigfoot family just sat there watching them curiously. Although the large Bigfoot kept poking the crackling fire with a large stick, and he would turn the fish around. When Zack regained his strength, he rose to his feet unhesitantly, with a bold, assertive confidence, and soberly walked straight up to the male Bigfoot, more as a sign of respect than anything else, as he figured that in ancient cultures you always respected the man first, giving him your full focus of attention. "Was he afraid?" asked Carol. "I mean, approaching this big male Bigfoot. It must have been daunting." The male Bigfoot was actually sitting on his haunches in front of the fire, as he was attending to it and watching over the fish, you see. He looked up at Zack as he made his approach. He was powerful, had a ponderous energy that was warm, congenial and kind, so that any fear Zack may have had abandoned him. The Bigfoot was scratching under his armpits as he listened to my brother, his eyes pinned directly on my brother's face, as if he was reading him like a page in a book. He said the Bigfoot smelt pleasant, of moss and earth, and of the smoke from the fire. "I'm sorry to intrude on your private space," my brother told him. "We've run out of oxygen. Is there any other way out of this cave, other than diving under the water again?" My brother said he was gesturing and pointing, trying to communicate his words with miming gestures. I gather the two younger Bigfoot were copying his movements as if it was a great big game for them, while the female Bigfoot was eating berries, like popcorn, as she watched them with a curious interest, as if they were actors in a silent movie that she was actually enjoying. My brother nearly jumped out of his skin when the male Bigfoot answered his question by speaking to him in an ancient language. He continued to poke at the fire. My brother said he knew exactly what the Bigfoot was saying. It was the weirdest thing he's ever experienced in his life, as the Bigfoot's foreign alien language was downloaded into his head in English, so fast that even a computer with such capabilities would be unlikely to be that quick. "Haminasi, agina fop abasina, hiladi no kolobon, aminasina, ho fakasa, hilaniko abilashinasi, homonikalina, havali bushalasina, homatilanitato, hafakashanasi, o bolikilana." "You seem to enjoy embracing danger, young man," said the Bigfoot. "I'm not surprised you're lost. It's a maze in those underwater caves. I'm just amazed you found our secret location. You are the first in over 400 years to find us. My family has lived in this cave for generations, and no one has found our secret location until now. I will take you out of the cave myself, personally, but at first you must join us for something to eat. The fish is now cooked. The two of you are faint with hunger, for your energy is faded." My brother said the smell of the fish was so incredibly good that he and his friend dived into the food with gusto. It was presented to them on large woven baskets, and my brother said the fish just crumbled off the bone. It was so delicious, and they just didn't have to worry about table manners, so they gobbled it all down. The male Bigfoot told them his name was Ukunaka, which means white owl. His wife was called Sequoia, which means sparrow. The little boy Bigfoot was called Adaya, which means oak tree, and the little girl was called Nokwisi, which means bright star. The Bigfoots were very talkative and gregarious. They talked earnestly among themselves, backwards and forwards, very fast. But when they spoke to Zack and his friend Keith, they slowed down their speech considerably. They told Zack he wouldn't live a long life. They could see his life path was short. "Ina mokolana, hikiti dazazolop, agila sofo, amina silanilo." "You play too much with the firefly, young man, but it is not through flames that you will ultimately meet your end. You will go by the way of the water. It is a peaceful exit, I can assure you of that. I can hear the water whispering your name, but it is not ready for you yet. But when it is, you will be taken by a golden canoe to the realms of the hereafter. A very pleasing journey, to be sure.
Many are looking forward to seeing you in the world of souls, I am told. Why didn't I go that way today? My brother asked him. The Bigfoot looked at him as if he was asking the most obvious question. You mean you don't know? He asked incredulously. It's not your time to go, but your time will soon come. But you have chosen your path. Everyone chooses their path. You were born under a Sagittarius rising, I see. Your spirit is untamed like a wild horse. You were wired this way. Your life was written as short before you were born. You chose it to be this way. You're right about that, my brother said. It can be the only reason why I take so many risks. So I must have chosen a short life path. I'm not sure how long my brother spent with the family of Bigfoots, but eventually the large Bigfoot carried both my brother and his friend out of the cave. But he insisted on blindfolding them first with strips of animal skin bound over their eyes. I think he was terribly proud that no one had discovered their cosy home for over 400 years, until my brother and his friend came along. The way out of the cave was treacherous, but the Bigfoot was nimble-footed. My brother said it was better being carried by him than actually riding a horse. His movements were graceful and fluid. He masterfully took them directly back to whence they first began the cave diving, and the following morning the rest of their scuba diving gear was returned to exactly the same spot. Wow, that's the most extraordinary story I've ever heard. I know you said your brother died. Did he die by the way of water, as Bigfoot said he would? Oh yes, he did die in the water, in another one of his underground cave adventures in Sweden, when there was no Bigfoot family to rescue him. My brother couldn't help himself. He'd embark on these dangerous quests again and again and again. And one day he unfortunately got tangled up in the rope, trying to navigate his way back to safety. He ran out of oxygen in the process. It was tragic, of course, but in truth we all knew that day would ultimately come, that no parent, sister or brother ever wants to hear about. Let's just say when we were informed of his passing, I was furiously angry with him. I was mad for a long time, until I reached the place of acceptance and finally forgiveness. He had written to us all letters saying goodbye, as he knew his life would be short. I remember I refused to open his letter for a long time. I knew if I read the letter my heart would melt like butter, and I would forgive him for leaving us. But I didn't want to forgive him. Of course, when I did open the letter, I did forgive him at once, but it wasn't easy. I miss him every day most awfully. Of course you do, said Carol, reaching out to give Sheila a reassuring nudge. Imagine telling a racehorse he couldn't race because it was dangerous. That racehorse would never listen to you. It has an inbuilt desire to run. This insatiable passion for adventure was clearly in your brother. I doubt it was much different. At least you can say your brother died doing what he loved best, and that's a good way to leave. Did he tell anyone about his Bigfoot experience? Definitely not. My brother was private like that, and besides, that treasured experience he had with Keith was uniquely special to him, and was not a story he'd ever wished to just share with anyone. Besides, he never wanted people to go looking for that cave, but I doubt it would be easy to find a Bigfoot cave, if anyone were to go looking for it. It would be like looking for lost treasure. They'd probably die trying to find it. It's far too great a risk anyway. Let's just say it was random chance, a fluke, a good fortune that my brother stumbled into that cave in the first place. It was like winning the lottery, a stroke of good fortune, you could say. What about his friend, the one that met the Bigfoot family? Is he still alive today? No, he also died exactly the same way as my brother did, in another adventure cave diving. But he was also told by the Bigfoots that that was the way he'd go. But did that stop him taking precarious risks? Absolutely not. My father says it's a daredevil personality type that you just can't suppress. Men like that, they live to take risks every day of their lives, and you can't stop them. Oh dear, that is so dreadful. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry for your loss, Sheila. Don't be, said Sheila. It's the way my brother wanted to go. It happened 8 years ago anyway. I've still got his ashes, you know. I intend to sprinkle them somewhere pretty. I'd like to scatter them over the turquoise waters, in an area close to where he encountered those Bigfoots. You see, encountering that Bigfoot family was one of the most pivotal things that ever happened to my brother. It was a big deal for him. He said that big male Bigfoot was so wise and the most interesting person he has ever encountered. He described Bigfoots as people. He said they're definitely not primates. Carol's account. When I heard Sheila's incredible story, I could see why she'd reacted the way she did at dinner, why she'd become so incredibly upset when I'd rudely dismissed the existence of Bigfoot with such a frivolous, scant disregard. I also realized she was absolutely right. I was brazenly arrogant, patronizingly opinionated, superciliously certain that I knew it all, when in truth I didn't know much at all. I had bumptiously ridiculed my own son's faith in Bigfoot, like an atheist might belittle a religious person for believing in God. They would say if you can't see a Bigfoot or you can't see God, then those things can't possibly exist. And that in itself is offensively ridiculous and very foolish. There are lots of things you can't see that are real, like radio, internet signals and electricity, yet we don't doubt their existence, do we? I think I grew up a victim to a school and college education system where I was told what to believe and how to think, and the textbooks became the gospel of my life. I never doubted anything I was fed by the education system, so in a way I was somewhat brainwashed, as I was not encouraged to think for myself. If something wasn't scientifically proven, I'd scathingly doubt it was actually real. Yet the irony of ironies is science is always changing its opinions and observations. Yet I'd remain stuck in a rigid way of perceiving the world, without questioning anything. I realized that made me pathetically sad, like an oyster stuck in my shell, with its pearl, refusing to believe that beyond my confined space there was a whole other world that I knew nothing about, that I'd completely overlooked, as all I knew was the grey contours of my oyster shell, and nothing beyond it. When Sheila told me her Bigfoot story, I knew it was true, and in a single second, all I thought I knew to be the truth was torn apart in an instant, and my paradigm of the world shattered and shifted exponentially. I knew I would never ever be the same again. "Why don't you take your brother's ashes to a place close to where he encountered those Bigfoot?" I said. "We can make a camping adventure of it. Go on, it'll be fun." "You mean you'd come with me?" she asked me, looking at me and my husband with a hopeful glint in her eyes. "Of course we'll come with you," said my husband. "Let's make an adventure of it. We can bring our kids along. It'll be fun. You can sprinkle your brother's ashes on the turquoise waters." "I would really appreciate that," said Sheila gratefully. "I know I've been meaning to scatter the ashes, but choosing the right place wasn't easy. But going to an area where those Bigfoot live, in that underground cave system, would be so wonderful. It was a place that meant an awful lot to my brother." 1 month later, we arrived at our camping destination, at the Bruce Peninsula National Park, Toberry, which is one of the most spectacular national parks in Canada, with turquoise waters, stunning white cliffs, rocky areas and forests. It's an idyllic spot where you can enjoy the privilege of swimming in those turquoise blue waters, and in truth, there's nothing quite like it. My children and Sheila's kids spent ages splashing around that water, kicking and screaming to their heart's content. We pitched up 2 tents under the tall, towering, lofty trees of the woodgrove that overlooked the exquisite blue turquoise lake. It was later on that bright, twinkling afternoon, that we stood stoically together, with glasses of bubbly in our hands, to celebrate Zach's short but meaningful life. Sheila's hands trembled as she reluctantly opened the urn, her hands heavily draped in a curtain of white ash, which she liberally sprinkled over the gleaming water. It floated away in a long grey ribbon. Then she flung out a white wreath of roses. I could see tears misting up her eyes. "I miss you, Zach. I really miss you. I think I understand your need to live life to the fullest. God broke the mold when he made you. You were always that unbridled stallion, seeking adventure and risking everything for excitement. I admire you, Zach, for being true to yourself. You've taught me so much about that when it comes to my own life." To Zack we all said, raising up our glasses, "Thanks so much for coming with us on this adventure. It means an awful lot," said Sheila, throwing her arms around me affectionately. "I feel you've become like a sister to me. More than a friend, you know."
"Well, in truth, I'm not sure any of us would have crossed paths," said my brother, "if my wife had not spontaneously invited you over to dinner that night. And that was a very uncomfortable thing for her to do because she's naturally shy. But we really thought we'd blown it when you burst into tears over Bigfoot."
Sheila laughed. "I couldn't help myself. You hit such a raw nerve." My son Stephen looked up at Sheila with an approving grin on his face. "You believe in Bigfoot?" he asked, looking thrilled. "Oh, I believe in Bigfoot all right," said Sheila, with a huge grin on her face. "My mother thinks he's fictitious," said Stephen, looking sorrowful. "She's always teasing me because I like that program, Finding Bigfoot." "Maybe your mother's not as closed-minded as she used to be," said Sheila, giving me a wink. "Chance will be a fine thing," said my son. I had not come on this serendipitous adventure with the Petersons with any notion that anything untoward would happen to me on this trip. Me and my husband had come here to support the Petersons by encouraging Sheila to finally lay her brother's ashes to rest. I had no idea that on this long weekend break, I was about to be challenged in a way I never imagined possible, almost as if the universe was taking a great deal of pleasure in having a good old dig at me. My son Stephen had spent a great deal of time in the forests looking for any Bigfoot evidence, but he emphatically decided that there were no signs of the creature in the vicinity. There were a few families camping not far away from us, with kids almost as noisy as owls. So if I was a Bigfoot, I would stay the hell away. That evening we sat around an open fire, making s'mores with the kids and telling ghost stories. Sheila, as usual, always had the best stories, and once again it was a story her brother had told her that she revealed to us. I think if you're adventurous like Zack was, you just invite the unusual in your life. Zack told me that one day he went camping with a good friend of his. He was only 17 years old at the time. They'd gone for a long hike, and they stumbled across this ancient-looking dilapidated place that was falling apart at the seams. The stone and wood house had been completely abandoned, an old relic from the 50s that had been forsaken, forgotten and neglected. The whole place was crumbling, falling to pieces. When you walked on the floorboards, they were so warped that they would just snap. The two of them were exploring the house out of an inquiring curiosity, as it's not every day on a random hike you stumble across a decrepit house in the middle of the woods. My brother said there was a pervasive darkness when they entered that building, like an evil that you could actually pick up. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something terrible had happened in that house. He wanted to cry, as if a heaviness overcame him, like a consuming depression, as if he was feeling somebody else's emotions that weren't actually his. He told me his friend was also trembling, looking at him with wide, earnest eyes, saying to him, "Bro, something really bad happened here. I can feel it." That was when they heard 2 gunshots being fired. It scared the hell out of them. They both ran away from that house as fast as they could. They were to learn later that the house they stumbled upon had been a crime scene in the 50s, when a father had shot his son and his wife at point-blank range. But they never found out why he did it. "So you think those gunshots your brother heard were actually being replayed back in our time?" "I think so," said Sheila. "That night when we retired to bed, I woke up to hear a rustling sound outside our tent. The adults were sleeping in one tent together, the kids in another. I thought that one of my children was going off to take a leak. I glanced briefly at my watch. It was 1:10 in the morning. I could hear everybody snoring in our tent. My bladder was stinging with fullness, and I knew I needed to relieve myself. Indeed, I was so desperate I was actually crossing my legs. I shuffled around in my sleeping bag and grabbed my torch. I stealthily crept through the tent, climbing over the sleeping bodies, and I undid the zip and sneaked out. I was waving my torch around, expecting to see one of the kids meandering off for a bathroom break, but that's not what I saw. Standing outside my tent, as if waiting for me, was a large Bigfoot. I just stood there gawking, the warm liquid of my urine trickling down my legs as my bladder just burst open. There was a soft, pearly moonlight on this night that dappled the creature in its ethereal illumination,
For a moment we just stared at each other. The Bigfoot was under 10 foot tall, built like an army tank, with the kindest eyes I've ever seen. In his large hands he held a wreath of white roses, the same one that was flung into the water earlier in the day. The creature spoke to me in his indigenous language, which I understood at once. Imakina Poppy, Isafani Zak Ikita. Tell Poppy that Zak's fine, and he's sorry. And with that the creature turned around and glided away, leaving me standing there with a wreath of white roses in my hands, looking completely bewildered. I was to find that Poppy was the name that Zak called his sister Sheila, who was thrilled to get the message from her brother, delivered to her from a Bigfoot. But why me? I asked her. Why was I the one to see him? Sheila laughed. Because you were the scoffer, of course. The universe had to have the last laugh. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.